Okay, let's unpack this. Can you imagine like a series of events, seemingly simple exchanges that just completely reshape continents, altering societies, changing history itself? That's really what we're diving deep into today, the Columbian exchange.
Yeah, exactly.
At its heart, it's this huge transfer,
Mm.
right? Food, animals, minerals, people, and diseases moving between Africa, Europe, and the Americas.
Hmm.
Now, that might sound a bit, I don't know, academic on paper, but honestly, after 1492, this exchange fundamentally transformed, well, everything. Societies, economies, the environment, across all three continents. And we still see the effects today.
Absolutely. And our mission here for you listening is to pull out the really key insights from the sources we've looked at, some surprising facts, and the profound impacts of this whole period. Because understanding the causes of the Columbian Exchange and its effects on both Europe and the Americas, it's just crucial for grasping modern history, really.
Okay, so great overview. Where do we even start digging into the actual impact? I'm really curious about Europe first. What did they actually gain from all this? What were the big wins for the old world?
That's a great starting point. And it's easy to jump to the dramatic stuff like gold, but one of the biggest, maybe overlooked shifts was actually agricultural. These new crops coming from the Americas,
Mhm.
they completely changed European diets.
Like potatoes and tomatoes, right?
Uh-huh.
Stuff we can't imagine European food without now.
Exactly. Take the potato. It wasn't just, another vegetable. It was a complete game changer. See, unlike wheat, potatoes could grow in colder, wetter areas, poorer soil even, and the calories you could get per acre. Incredible.
Huh. So it wasn't just variety, it was actual sustenance.
Precisely. It wasn't just diversifying diets, it was literally fueling population booms. Think Ireland, Northern Europe. It radically changed farming, even helped pave the way for industrialization later on. It's often underestimated. And beyond the potato, you mentioned tomatoes, but also maize, corn, cacao, tobacco, huge additions.
That's fascinating. So a total agricultural shift. But okay, we do have to talk about the shiny stuff too. The mineral wealth flooding into Europe.
Oh, absolutely. You can't ignore that. After the conquests of the Incas and Aztecs, the Spanish basically just plundered unbelievable amounts of gold and silver.
Made Spain incredibly rich.
Overwhelmingly wealthy, yes, at least for a while. But the key thing here, the insight from the sources, is that this wasn't just about filling treasure chests. It fundamentally rewired European economics. All that silver, especially from places like Potosi in Bolivia.
Right.
It caused huge inflation across Europe. They call it the price revolution.
So it wasn't just Spain getting rich, it actually destabilized things elsewhere.
Exactly. It threw established economies off kilter, forced a complete rethink of how goods were valued, how trade worked. It was massive.
So if it wasn't all just simple prosperity, what did this flood of minerals mean for, like, the structure of European society, this economic boom from the early 1500s onwards? How did that change things more deeply?
Well, that American silver did way more than just boost royal bank accounts. It basically put the transition away from feudalism into overdrive. Feudalism peasants working a noble's land for protection. That system was built on local farming obligation.
Right, very static in a way.
Very. But suddenly you have all this new wealth, massive new trade opportunities. The old system just couldn't keep up. It couldn't meet the demand. So it really hastened the shift towards capitalism. Private ownership, people making money through trade, open markets. It wasn't gradual. It felt more like an accelerated revolution driven by this influx.
Okay, so we have crops, minerals, but there's also the transfer of people. And this is where the story gets much, much darker.
Yeah.
There were some enslaved Native Americans taken to Spain, relatively few, but the movement of enslaved Africans to the Americas, that was on a whole different scale.
Oh, far, far more significant.
And
Devastatingly brutal. Enslaved Africans were captured, sold, then packed onto ships for the horrific middle passage across the Atlantic. Disease, starvation. Huge numbers died before they even arrived.
just unimaginable conditions.
Really. And those who survived were sold into forced labor, becoming the absolute backbone of the colonial economies, especially sugar plantations in the Caribbean and Brazil.
So given this enormous scale, crops, wealth, and tragically the people, how did this all even happen logistically? How was it financed, made possible? What were the key innovations?
Well, technology was absolutely vital. You have things like the caravel, that Portuguese ship design, smaller, faster, could sail closer to the wind. Huge advantage.
Okay.
And they were just inventing everything new. They were smart about integrating existing tech. The magnetic compass, which originally came from China.
Right, for direction.
Yep.
Right.
And the astrolabe from the Islamic world for figuring out latitude using the stars. These tools weren't just gadgets. They literally unlocked the ability to cross oceans reliably.
Okay, so the tech makes the journeys feasible. But these were still huge, expensive undertakings.
Yeah.
How did they pay for it all? Spain was state-driven, you mentioned.
Exactly. The Spanish crown was heavily involved, pushing mercantilist policies, basically. Government controlling the economy to maximize exports and hoard gold and silver.
Got it.
But later on, especially with the English in the 1600s, you see a big shift towards joint stock companies.
Ah, like pooling resources.
Precisely. Companies could raise money from lots of different investors to fund voyages, to spread the risk out, and it massively increased the amount of exploration and colonization that could happen because it wasn't just reliant on the king's treasury anymore. It became more of a private enterprise backed by investors looking for returns.
Makes sense. But of course, we absolutely have to pivot here. Because while Europe was gaining all this, the Americas, well, the impact on the native populations was catastrophic. Let's shift focus there.
Yes, it's crucial, and perhaps the most devastating factor was disease. Native peoples were just completely vulnerable to diseases brought from Europe and Africa, smallpox, measles, influenza.
Because they've been isolated for so long, right?
Yeah.
No built-up immunity.
Exactly. Thousands of years of separation meant no resistance. Smallpox, especially, it was just horrific in its impact. An invisible killer, really.
And the numbers you see in the sources are just gut-wrenching. Hispaniola, the Taino, and Arawak people, nearly 300,000 dead from smallpox shortly after the Spanish arrived. It's almost impossible to fathom.
It really is.
And the Incas, maybe 9 million people around 1530, a century later. Just 500,000, 500,000.
Unbelievable losses.
And then the Aztecs, the Maya, their neighbors, maybe 40 million people combined in 1530. Fast forward 150 years, and it's down to 3 million.
Just decimated.
It really puts the conquest into perspective. Tenochtitlan, the Aztec capital, huge city, falls to Cortés, who had, maybe 1,000 Spaniards plus allies. Disease did most of the work.
It was arguably more effective than any weapon they carried, which, raises that really important question. How did this biological catastrophe reshape the Americas so fundamentally? And how did it actually enable the European conquest on such a scale with relatively few soldiers on the ground?
A sobering thought. But it wasn't only disease flowing one way, biologically speaking. Europeans and Africans also brought new plants and animals to the Americas.
That's right. The exchange went both ways biologically, though the impacts were different.
We're talking things like rice, wheat, soybeans, oats, lemons, oranges.
Yeah.
Stuff that wasn't there before.
Yes, and those grain crops, wheat and rice especially, really did transform agriculture in parts of the Americas. They became new staple foods, allowed for different farming styles.
And animals too, right?
Oh, absolutely. The introduction of horses, pigs, cattle, chickens, that was revolutionary. Pigs and cattle provided new, abundant sources of protein, changing diets significantly.
And horses. I mean, that must have changed everything for native groups on the plains, for example.
Completely. Horses revolutionized hunting, travel, and definitely warfare. They profoundly altered the cultures and power dynamics of many indigenous societies.
So, okay, pulling back to get the big picture.
Mm-hmm.
What's the main takeaway here? The Columbian Exchange. It's so much more than just, trade. It feels like this massive, complex, two-way transformation. Continents, cultures, ecosystems all fundamentally change. It linked the world, but wow, at such an unequal cost.
Absolutely. It really marks the beginning of globalization as we understand it. It set the template for the modern world in so many ways, both good and bad. And, knowledge is best when you can actually apply it, understand its relevance. So we really encourage you, the listener, to think about the ripples, the long-term consequences of these transfers, crops, animals, people, ideas, diseases, how they still play out today.
Yeah, definitely. Maybe as you, go about your day, think about your food, how much of what's on your plate or grown locally actually traces back to this massive exchange centuries ago? Potatoes, tomatoes, corn, coffee, sugar, beef. How did the Columbian Exchange shape your world, maybe even your dinner tonight? It's often much closer, much more present than you might think.